Okay, so I think we can make a start because it's 6 p.m., right? Right, so hi everyone. Welcome to this Oxford Health BRC public talk on neurodiversity and research. Before we start, just going through the usual housekeeping needs. So there's no fire drills planned. So if the alarm rings, just run. The assembly point. The assembly point is through your right. If you've been to the common room where refreshments were, it's through your right towards continue straight, and then it's in the courtyard. That's also where you will find the toilets access. So through that door, through the stairs, and then turn left and then turn right. Feel free to move and steam as much as you need. And we would like to use a deaf clap. We've trialed this at the Neurodiversity conference last year, and it was very helpful and I think neurodivergent friendly. So I know it's going to be hard at the beginning, but instead of a usual clap, we just do this, and we have a silent deaf clap. If you need anything organization-wise, if you are lost, feel free to go to Sophie and Sarah, my colleagues who have put this event together. They are waving at you at the back. And yeah, I think I didn't miss anything. Right, who am I? I should have said my name. To start with, I am Andreia. I'm Andreia Costa. I wear many hats. One of them is being the project manager for training and academic career development at the Oxford Health Biomedical Research Centre. I also led the organization of the Neurodiversity conference last September, which was, I think, two of the best days of my life. And some of you attended, I think you would agree. I also chair the Neurodiversity and Disability Working Group at the Department of Psychiatry, which means that with other working group members, we lead initiatives that support neurodivergent staff and neurodivergent and disabled staff and students. And then on the personal side, I started the Neurodiverse Voices project 2 years ago, and it has been just registered as a community interest company, all very recent, and it's now called Neurodiverse Voices Connect, and I host the Neurodiverse Voices podcast. That's why I'm your host today as the podcast's style talk that we are going to have. And all of this has been inspired by my daughter, Melody, who is 9 years old. She's autistic and she has a speech and language delay, and also by my recent diagnosis of ADHD at the age of 42. Quite late, but welcome, because I feel like I now better understand myself. Research. So I do get involved in research quite a lot. There's a few examples of studies that I am involved in currently. I'm an advisory board member of the Exploring Character Strengths study led by Dr. J.D. Lai. I'm also, I started recently being involved in the Understanding Pain in Autistic People Across the Lifespan, led by Dr. Eri, who is one of our speakers today. And these are Oxford-based, but I also have started getting involved in other studies from other universities, like the University of Salford and Manchester. And why is it being involved in research so important to me? I think, first of all, my lived experience, not only as a parent, but as being neurodivergent myself, feels valued. I help shape the future of healthcare research. It also helps me to better understand my daughter and myself. The Exploring Character Strengths study is a good example of that, because it leverages the strengths. Sometimes we have the tendency to focus on the deficits, and looking at the strengths was really helpful, not only for herself, but for myself as well. And it gives me the purpose within the community context, especially now that I'm running my own community interest company. So if you would like to connect, here are my contact details. The QR code will take you to my link tree. I still do not have a website. It's work in progress, but I'm on social media, so feel free to reach out. I'll be very happy to connect. And that's me. So now I would like to, as I mentioned, I'm the host of today's talk, and I would like to welcome to the stage Professor Clare Mackay.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the format for this evening is that we're all going to give a very brief presentation, and then we'll do a lot of questions and answers. So 3 slides is what I was allowed to have, and so you'll see that I have slipped in plenty of detail into my 3 slides. So I'm a neuroscientist. I have been studying the brain for 30 years. I've studied a whole range of different diseases and disorders over these 30 years. Most recently, and I can see a couple of familiar faces from our advisory group, I have been studying aging and dementia for the last couple of decades. But for all of that time, when I was studying this other set of diseases and disorders that I don't necessarily suffer from, I was sitting on a secret one of my own. This is a picture of me, a 20-year-old picture of me. As you can see, I had different coloured hair back then. And I know that when you look at this picture of me from 20 years ago, you don't see anything in particular other than that I look quite jolly, looking at something interesting over there. But when I look at this picture, to me, it screams out that I have failed to cover up the bald spot on the top of my hair. There are absolutely no eyelashes on that face. And my fingers are almost certainly bitten. My fingernails are bitten down to the quick. I'm covered in painful infections because they always were. So I live with something called body-focused repetitive behaviours, or BFRVs, and hair pulling, skin picking, nail biting. These are all examples of BFRVs. And they are common in general. They're even more common in people who have neurodivergent diagnoses, and we don't know anything like as much as we need to about them, partly because they're largely very hidden and stigmatized thing. So a couple of years ago, I decided it was time for me to start speaking out about the BFRBs that I live with. And so I kind of went from telling absolutely nobody about BFRBs to telling pretty much everybody who'll listen about them. And so now I use the platform that I have, the opportunity that I have, and I'm grateful for this one this evening, to any chance I get to raise awareness about BFRBs, to reduce the stigma, and to help people who live with them feel a little bit less alone and a little bit more understood, and hopefully we change things one step at a time. So the research that I'm doing covers a wide range of things, but it's really focused on these questions. So if you think about the process of actually pulling out a hair or picking at a bit of skin or biting a nail, there's actually quite a lot involved in that. So there's a predisposition. So why me? Why do I do this? Why do I do that particular thing instead of something else? There's an urge. Like, what is that urge? We don't really fully understand what that urge is, or what gives rise to it, or what makes me want to do it. There's the action itself. There's the actual picking, pulling, biting action itself, which obviously is in some way rewarding and motivating. Otherwise, I wouldn't keep doing it. There's getting stuck. So I get stuck with my hair pulling and skin picking and nail biting. And I know I want to stop. I desperately want to stop, but I can't. So what is that? What is that getting stuck? And then finally, the consequences. So there are all sorts of ways in which I feel a bit rubbish about myself because I can't control the urges to pick, pull and bite. And there's plenty that we need to know about that as well. So I don't have time to go into this today, but just as a little taster, a lot of the predisposition is because we're primates, and all primates pick and pull and bite. And most animals, there are examples across many animal species of overgrooming. When animals are in distress, they overgroom, and we're no different from that. There are amazing links between our brains and our skin. We don't think about them because we just take them for granted. But for example, all of our emotions show on our skin in ways we have no control over. When we're embarrassed, we blush. When we're angry, our hair stands on end. Our skin is actually an emotion signaling system. So perhaps it's not so surprising that sometimes when our emotions are perhaps a bit off kilter, something shows up in our skin. And for some of us, that feels like an urge to pick, pull or bite. We have a trance-like state. We go into a bit of a dissociated state when we're picking, pulling and biting. And that's a bit like when you're stuck on the sofa scrolling, or perhaps you're a shopper, or perhaps you're a gambler, where all of these things kind of put you into a slightly, you're aware. It's not that you're not aware, but you're kind of zoned out. And that's the same to BFRBs. And then there's a whole range of reasons why it feels bad to have BFRBs. And that has to do with the fact that our skin and our hair and our nails are a large part of our identity. That's all in the book that I've just written, and that's one of the ways you can learn more. These are all the ways that you can connect with me. I'm the Trick Prof on all social media channels. My website showed up on the previous slide. There are some leaflets outside if you want to know more about BFRBs. There's a book that you can buy called Keep Your Hair On, Understanding Urges to Pickle and Bite. For those who are interested in looking for support communities, my good friends at BFRB UK and Ireland are a fantastic place to go to for information and support. And you're all invited to the BFRB conference, which will be here in Oxford in October this year. And I hope to see many of you there. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, my name is Eri. I'm a postdoc at the Oxford Center for Integrative Neurodivergent. So my research focus is on K perception in autistic population. And when I tell people I do K perception experiments, they're like, oh, that's not really me. And K experiments can take many different forms, but here's just an example of what I've done in the past. So what you see on the left is how I collect your physiological data. So when I give you K stimuli, you should get aroused. So that's how I collect your arousal rates. And then on the right is how I delivered the K stimulus. In this case, it was an electric shock. So I gave you electric shocks and you told me how painful it was. So that was the setup of the K experiment that I did. And another research focus that I have is looking at individual differences within the autistic populations, such as alexithymia. So alexithymia is a subclinical condition characterized by difficulties that are adapted by one's own emotions and distinguishing bodily sensations from emotions. And it's thought to occur in about up to 50% of the autistic population, but only 5% of the general population. So when I think about pain experience, I think of it as a multi-step process. So first you need to perceive the pain and process it, and then you need to communicate it. So if you bang your arm on the door or something, you need to say ouch so that the other person can know that you're in pain. And then it can perhaps lead to certain health outcomes because, for example, if you have appendicitis, it usually starts with a tummy ache. But if you're not able to effectively communicate your pain or describe or identify the pain that you're feeling, that might delay the medical interventions. And then usually medical interventions is really important. So your condition might worsen, leading to worse health outcomes. So in my previous research, I looked at how cognitive modulation and pain might be different for autistic people. So I looked at expectation effects such as placebo effects. So expecting that something will be less painful will make you feel that it's actually less painful. And I also looked at health outcomes. So we found that autistic people were more likely to die of avoidable causes than non-autistic people. So we found out that at these two stages, perception and health outcomes, there seems to be differences within autistic population compared to non-autistic people. So then we wanted to see if there will be any differences in pain communications, and that's our key project. So there's so many different ways to communicate pain. So by using pain ratings, but also through your physiological response. So it can be your arousal, like I showed you earlier, or how much your pupil dilates. But the current research only focuses on non-autistic people, and they're creating algorithms to objectively quantify pain. But if we're not including autistic people at this stage, what we think is that it could further exacerbate the health inequalities that we see in autistic people because we have different ways of expressing pain. So like I said, we're at the very early stages of our NIHR project. There are so many ways you could get involved, and I really hope that some of you will do. We're interested in knowing people's experience with pain, whether it's acute or chronic, whether you're autistic or non-autistic. We're also looking for co-design group members for our new projects, so we'll love to hear from you. And if you'd like to be more active participants, we are holding a one-day workshop sometime in late October. So if you're interested in participating, we would love to hear from you. And those are email addresses. I did a social media person. I don't have any social media, so email is the only way to get in touch with me. But yeah, thank you. Hello. Hi. So my name is Alice Quinton. And I've tried to sort of put together some of the experiences that I'm sort of talking from today. And essentially, I did my PhD over at Camberwell in London with Francesca Happe, who is a lovely autism researcher. And my PhD was really focused on making sure that our study of trauma and also PTSD was accessible for obesity and people. And we did that in sort of a number of ways, using certain data sets, qualitative interviews of teachers, talking to clinicians about how they approached us. If they have a traumatized or autistic child, and they approach that in clinic. And generally, I mean, the take-home message of my PhD was that all these senses need to talk to each other a bit more as well. And the other experience is my current role as a postdoctoral researcher at the Reimagine Lab. So this is Alex, my PI, and we focus on all things mental imagery. But we'll always try to basically bring along neurodivergent people into that conversation. And I'll tell you a bit more about it on the next slide. So our research is this intersection of how mental imagery and mental health come together and interact with each other. So if I was to say to you all, picture an apple in your mind, the chances are that you'll be on somewhere along this spectrum. So some of you might see it really clear, like seeing something, and some of you might see absolutely nothing, aphantasia, it's not there. But the chances are you're somewhere along there. And when we think about mental health and how mental imagery intersects with that, we think about flashbacks and trauma, think about the worst case scenario and anxiety. So we're really interested in that, but we want to make sure that we're including neurodivergent people in that, because for a long time, people have been left out of that conversation due to some views of us sort of not enjoying imaginative play, or there's quite high prevalence of aphantasia in this population. But with my work with autistic people, I often hear that it's really helpful sometimes to think through imagery and to use imagery-based interventions, particularly if you maybe don't like narrativizing your experiences. It can be quite a nice thing to focus on that. So it will do lots of different things to target mental imagery as well. So I just want to leave you with some opportunities. So we have a youth advisory group. So if anyone in your life is 16 to 25, they inform lots of our research. We put a lot of our research past them. If you have any young people that like photography and want to explore experiences of coping with the trauma, we have a lovely work by the page using photo voice. So these are all paid opportunities. We have self-compassion with Christy. So that's parents, teachers, and autistic youth. And this one around PDA. So if you are a sibling of someone who has PDA, this is an interview with Alex. And these are all lovely people. So if this means something to you, leave the picture and have you involved.
Right, so many examples of different types of research that's kind of go around neurodiversity that we just presented. I am sorry, this is the wire is not.
Oh no, it's in here.
Yeah, okay, I don't know. So now we are going to start our discussion, and I have a few questions for each one of you. And quite interested and curious to get to learn more from you. So I'll start with Claire. It's okay. So Claire, as you said, you've been studying the brain for 30 years, and recently, with your experience, your focus is on body focused repetitive behaviors, and we know that that's a strong link with the neurodivergent community. So why is it important to you that neurodivergent people are meaningfully included in your research?
Thank you. So it's critically important that anybody who lives with whatever disorder it might be is given an opportunity to take part in research. And that's, of course, no different for people who are neurodivergent than it is for everybody else. For BFRBs in particular, well, I'll start by saying that it was a surprise to me to find great resonance with the neurodivergent community when I started talking about BFRBs and started doing this research, because I actually didn't know about the link between BFRBs and both autism and ADHD before I started to do the research. And so it was a surprise, a pleasant surprise, and I felt incredibly kind of welcomed into these communities because so many people recognize that this is a big problem for many people. So the most obvious answer is anybody who's infected by something should feel the opportunity to influence what that research is. The types of questions that we end up asking are much better if they come from people who are living with the experience of the disorder itself. And then the last thing I'll say is that, as I said, it was a surprise to be welcomed in by the neurodivergent community, but also you learn so much by talking to other people with lived experience. And the massive thing that I've learned that comes from neurodiversity or neurodivergence is the lesson of language and how we can subtly change our language that makes a big difference to how you feel when you're living with any particular condition or disorder or disease or whatever it might be. So in the case of VFRBs, I find that as somebody who lives with these, that my shoulders go up when I hear the language of disorder and abnormality and all of the words that we tend to use in medical research that make me feel a lesser human. And so what I've learned from neurodivergent communities is the language of difference, and that we can just say, my brain works differently from your brain, and that's both are acceptable, and it doesn't mean mine is wrong. So I think those are my sort of first thoughts about that.
Absolutely. And I think the neurodivergent myself, even the ASC or ASC not its condition, but ASC, those words, the deficits model kicks taking over. So that's why I was saying earlier that the character strengths project is so important and close to my heart, because that made such a huge shift. Even, loving my daughter the best. So yeah, I absolutely agree. Thanks, Claire. Alice, with your work exploring mental imagery and trauma, and you're already working with autistic young people, how do you adapt your research methods to accommodate neurodivergent participants, and what have you learned from doing so far?
Yeah, so I guess there's a few ways I thought about this. So within my PhD, obviously we're thinking about making trauma definitions more inclusive for neurodivergent young people. And a lot of the sort of the research I did and research that other people have done have shown that some of these more traditional traumas, things that we would expect people to be traumatized by, are experienced at, unfortunately, at higher levels within neurodivergent young people. But there are also this idea that we need to start keep taking into account how people are experiencing the world, and that may change how you think about trauma. So we think about someone who has really, really sensory sensitivities, and their experience of something that feels quite day-to-day for one person might be totally different. So thinking about sort of school environments, thinking about sort of transport, getting around, those might be different for someone whose experience is a little bit different to some other people's. So it's about kind of being inclusive for all children when we're thinking about what might affect people. And then sort of in the work I'm doing at the moment, we do a lot of work with our youth advisory group in informing our research and how we go about doing studies, so sort of data collection, how we sort of talk to people, how we go about interacting with people online and in calls. And the real learning has been that most of these things are sort of quite sensible, so they tend to be pretty, thinking things through beforehand and giving people a heads up on how things are going to work. Offering people breaks, asking people how they prefer to communicate. These are all things that actually help me as a researcher do my job better. So I quite like knowing what I'm going to do beforehand, but it also is something that makes everyone feel much more comfortable. So I think what's been really interesting, I was talking to a young person the other day, and they just said, the thing that matters to me is that you're flexible and it feels like warm and open, and I can change my mind about any of these things at any time. And that doesn't feel like it's going to be a problem. And that seems to be like the main takeaway, is that there isn't one size fits all, but there's certain things that might be helpful for lots of different people at different times.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I know what we say is sometimes it's simpler than what we think it's, and it's a lot easier to implement than we expect. So yeah, thank you. Eri, your research looks at how autistic people experience pain and communicates pain across the lifespan. Any challenges you have encountered in making research environments accessible, and what practical changes would you make to improve this?
I think with pain perception experiments, people just don't really know what to expect. Well, I guess that could be so in general with any academic research, but with pain, I don't know, for me, I hear the word pain, I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that. So I think for me, it's just about making sure that the process is as transparent as possible, making sure that people feel as comfortable as possible. And like Alice would say, like, take as many breaks, or if they want to stop, they can just stop if they want to. But I think those changes, like Alice said, just benefits everyone, including autistic and non-autistic people. And those are like structural changes that we can make. But I think I also learned a lot from our autistic participants. So for example, one of them, I had bright red nail polish on, and she said, that's just too distracting for me. And then like, your perfume is overwhelming. So I'm like, okay, good to know that I didn't even think about those things before. And because I am doing pain perception experiments, I think I just need to be a bit more aware of like sensory differences that people may have. So I think these are like small changes that I try to implement as much as possible without affecting the quality of research that we do.
Yeah, and it's also important to build that trust as well, that they feel comfortable with you, we know that autistic people can be quite honest, but, I think you need a certain level of trust to be able to tell you that your red nails are about like you. So that's great. Okay, and our general question, and I will be looking forward to volunteers. So we are talking about inclusive research, and we often talk about it. But what does that actually look like in practice?
So, as I said in my previous answer, the most important thing that's required for inclusive research is really good input from people with lived experience. And that is something that we know that that's a good idea in general. In medical research these days, our funders require us to have input from people with lived experience these days. But the truth is that in some scenarios, the pressures that we're under as academics mean that reaching out for input from people with lived experience can sometimes be a bit tokenistic. It can sometimes be a bit unsatisfying from the other side of the table. And I think that there's work to do to teach our funders and to think about the kind of criteria that we're required to meet as academics as needing to include really good engagement and involvement of people with lived experience. Now, in the case of the work that I'm doing, I have the particular benefit that I can bring my own lived experience, but also and connect it to loads of other people's lived experience through my kind of through that link. And so as a scientist, I know how we construct questions, and I'm a person who lives with a disorder. So I can have a pretty good stab at thinking of good research questions that relate to BFRBs, but I never would assume that that's enough. I would never assume that I don't need to now go and ask, a whole range of different people with different experiences than mine to make sure that we get a good, diverse input in that. And so PPI, lived experience, absolutely critical. But just before I hand the microphone back, I will say it does take time. It takes time. It takes skill. And I'm super fortunate that in my team we have people who really specialize in engagement with people with lived experience. And I think that needs to be valued more and more as we go forward to make sure that we make the best of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else has anything else to add?
Yeah, I think on that is having those sort of specialized people that are going to look after that is really important, because I mean, we've been having lots of conversations around sort of instability of academic careers. So if you're on a really short contract and you hold a lot of power as a researcher in that moment, but 6 months time you might not have a job. So it's sort of trying to make sure that I think we just need to actually open up that dialogue a little bit more and maybe be a bit honest about that. And because generally, if we're respecting people as co-researchers and members of our team, we should respect people enough to tell them the truth about that and to let them into our world enough to be transparent about what it is we're able to give and what it is we're able to collaborate on. And even if the answer is, we don't know, we hope that this is going to be okay in the future, that just being transparent about that and not just leading people on with sort of the best case scenario, I think is always quite important as well.
Definitely. I was just going to add that is about, I think we've discussed this at Neurodiversity conference, right? Demystifying a little bit with a researcher, it may sound scary title, professor, doctors. And that's something I learned, I'm still a member of the public, even more part of the BRC, but it is something that I love is, to understand that Claire, Eri, and Alice, I got titled, but they are just as human as we all are. So yeah, I think that's very important to reduce that hierarchy of the relationship. Okay, and one final question now, looking ahead to the future. What would truly inclusive research look like in 5-10 years? And if there's anything that you could do tomorrow to improve this, what would it be?
I don't think I have an answer for the second question. But I think from my perspective, I think truly inclusive research needs including the entire spectrum of autistic people into research. So currently, yes, we doing PPIE work and like people share their lived experience, but people who participate in my research, for example, they're verbal, they're able to commute to the study location, they're able to understand the task demands, give consent. There are practical and ethical considerations around this. And I know that that's only a very small subset of the spectrum. And then we've talked about this. Well, how do we include nonverbal people and like nonverbal forms of communication or pain, for example? Because, a psychiatrist was telling me that an autistic person was referred because of a subtle change in behavior, and their parents were really worried. Just turned out that they had a broken bone and they were in so much pain. So I think that just shows that there's so much still to do, and I don't really know how to make sure the entire spectrum of people or autistic people are included. But I think right now we ask people to come to us, and perhaps we need to go to them. Do we know how we do that from the current situation? But yeah, that's what I hope it'll look like in the future.
And I'll just add to that inclusivity is everything, not just neurodiversity. When we think about inclusivity, we think about gender, we might think about socioeconomic status, we might think about race and culture and all of those things. And so taking everything into account, trying to take everything into account would explode our brains every time we try to make any decision. And so we have to find a balance. A sensible balance has to be reached. Otherwise, we'll need everybody to put into everything we do before we make any progress. So we need to be mindful about making sure that we don't exclude people, but also it has to be balanced with actually getting some research done. However, I think where we want to be moving to is that if I understand correctly, most research in neurodivergence to date has been sort of research that's done in a group of people who might have autism or ADHD or other forms of neurodivergence. And I think that going forwards, just like the research that you've heard about today, Eri's research is a great example. It just needs to be, it needs to be broad. The research that we do needs to be broadened out so that when we're researching anything, we have a bit of information about somebody's neurotype that's incorporated in, just as we would collect age and sex and all of those other things that we might collect about somebody, so that we don't miss out something really important that might be there in the data because we just haven't asked about it.
Yeah, I agree with both of you on all those things. But I guess kind of for in our research and in sort of mental health research, we've got all these wonderful, really enthusiastic people that want to get involved, and they're really, really helpful. But it's the people that aren't so keen. So we've got a lot of people who are really keen on psychology. We've got a lot of girls. And what we're really trying to reach is the people that aren't necessarily going to uni to study these things. The young boys really are who we're really trying to reach. So we're doing some work with our sort of honorary boy in our youth advisory group to try and just think about like how can we make things more interesting or make things like you said, go to them essentially, because that's a real missing part, I think, particularly in participatory research in mental health more broadly, and also in the autism research as well.
Thank you. So I think we can now welcome any questions from the audience.
Recommend done.
I can do this one.
I have a question for Eri. Is there research only focused for adults, on adults? Again, taking from the experience with my own kid, that I was wondering if adults has learned to react strongly to pain a little bit, whether there's a sort of learned behavioral component of it, and whether looking at children will be more raw in terms of how they respond, how they perceive.
So my CAS experiments have only been on adults for consenting issues, but our next project, the communication of Hey that I've talked about, we're taking a live course of birth. Still, we want to hear from young people, their carers, adults, older adults, because I think you're right, there's probably a learning aspect. We're just about to do a pain learning paradigm now. So that is definitely something we're looking into, but I don't really have a concrete answer, but I'd love to hear more from you if you're interested in participating or share your thoughts. Going to keep.
And a question from like a personal point of view, from someone asking, going to the doctors for things like pain, skin picking, How long do you think it's going to be that going to the GP will not catch up, but you go there to be understood as a border? What's going on back then, and just telling me, oh, it's just that, and off you go, and you have to come back again and again and again. So I find that's like I don't know if many other adults agree, but if you're back and forth for the same thing and nobody's taking you seriously looking at your neurodivergence, so I wonder how long that's going to take to catch up, I guess.
Yeah, tricky one. And I think, first of all, I have some sympathy with GPs whose job it is to know everything about everything. However, there are some aspects of our mental health and well-being that they are really still lacking any knowledge in, and BFRBs are massively lacking from medical knowledge in general. And I think that in the 8 minutes that you get with the GP's just got to deal with whatever it is that you brought them today, and they don't want a list; they want one thing to deal with. And so I think that there is a sense in which we, with help, could potentially be able to take not more responsibility, but to learn how to put the picture together ourselves to a certain extent. I mean, kind of that's what specialists are for, but your access to get to know this is tricky as well. But so in relation to things like BFRBs, there's a huge awareness raising element to that needs to happen. But the way in which I think that works best is to really focus on distress first. So psychologists, psychiatrists, GPs will have in their head, if not actually on a piece of paper, a kind of checklist of things that they work through. And if your thing isn't on the checklist, then they don't really know necessarily where to go there. And that's too broad a sweeping statement, but you get the general idea. Whereas the idea of starting with, tell me what's going on for you, and tell me what's bothering you the most. Where is your distress most focus? And that's not really the way that it's necessarily done at the moment. And I think a distress-first approach, and then trying to map out all of those multifaceted things that so often show up. When people are in distress, bodies will manifest that distress in a whole range of different ways. And so you will just end up with a list of things that the GP doesn't quite know how to put together. But we need to understand the system as a whole and the way that it is responding to fundamental distress, and to try to, and it's not a great answer, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a frustration that a lot of people have. And it's definitely a lot of the works that from the lab that I was in King, a lot of the projects were around, we're studying this thing in autistic people or this thing in people with ADHD. And a lot of the outcomes from the projects were either training up neurodevelopmental services, but the thing that seemed to be more impactful was training up the other services. So either the mental health service, making them more neurodiversity aware, or looking at DP services. So we have research that's focused on older age. So it's actually more impactful to go to the people who specialize in older age adults and teach them about autism, neurodiversity, affirming care. So I think there are little things happening just because everything's so siloed. It takes a while to get back. But I think there are some projects around working on modules for GP training and for training within all these different specialisms. They're trying to basically add a slideshow on neurodiversity within training packages, I think. So hopefully some positive things are coming.
I'm not even sure I know how to form this question, but I'll have a go. A lot of neurodivergence has massively different diagnostic rates. So ADHD, autism, the diagnosis rates by age and by socio-economic groups, etc., are hugely different. When you say you're including, say, autistic people in research, I assume you're including diagnosed autistic people in research, which is a pre-skewed sample of autistic people. Is that just a problem you live with, or you have a way of trying to address that problem?
So, yeah, that's a really good question. And in the majority of our studies, we do accept people who are self-diagnosed, and we tend to ask this question. And again, it's not perfect, and people will critique that as well. But we often will ask kind of, okay, do you consider yourself to be autistic? And then we'll have probably about 5 options, and it'll be, I'm on a waiting list, I'm waiting to be on waiting list, I self-identify and I'm not interested in a waiting list. So we can sort of get that to that granular level of where people are at. And then we can essentially, what we tend to do is we run the analysis or look at the results of the study, and then we take out all the people that are at various levels of those self-diagnosis to validate that we can include them within the research. Or we do things like look at trait measures, and we compare the groups. So we go, okay, these are self-diagnosed, these are not, these are diagnosed by a professional. How are they comparing? And we look on a trait level, no significant different, great, let's put more in a group as autistic people together. So I think it is definitely something people are finding more difficult, particularly kind of as we are getting a broader spectrum, I think, at the moment, and also waiting lists are getting much longer. But yeah, that tends to be how we're addressing it. Unless it's a really clinical study, then we might ask people for that diagnosis as well. I don't know how you deal with it. There you go.
Yeah, so we include anyone who's self-identify as being autistic, and we collect trait measures. So for me, because I'm interested in individual differences, I collect like autistic traits, or like spider traits, anxious traits, and we used to collect ADOMS measures, which is more about diagnostic criteria for autistic people. That score really varied. Whether even if you're diagnosed as autistic, had a clinical diagnosis of autism, most people didn't meet the cutoff when we did the test. So I think we kind of let go of that and decided to take the self-identification approach, and that's what we mostly. I did a big data set analysis, and that's what we did there as well. Just because, like you say, there's a massive diagnosis issue with older adults, but also with younger females as well.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for such an informative discussion. My question is, and very few will I get in my thoughts, but so I am kind of looking at research in neurodiversity and neurodivergence, and it does look like it's still catching up compared to the rest of research in psychology, neuroscience, health. And I'm also thinking about research on women's health that is also catching up. And then we have the impact that neurodivergence has on women's health and the delay in some diagnosis, etc. And then I look around the room and I see mostly women. Thank you to men who joined as well. And I'm just wondering if we will always kind of be siloed, or if there is a way to bring awareness to other researchers who might not be in the room, who might think that research about neurodiversity, research about women's health is maybe not as important, and how to just, I'm trying to think of what I'm trying to say, just how to ensure that there is just more visibility and people see the importance of this type of research, and we can bring it outside of the echo chamber I feel exists now. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I guess there's always, well, actually, I'll start by saying that academic researchers are subject to fashion and trends in just the same way as everybody else is. And so so I'm trying to get everybody who will listen to be interested in body-focused repetitive behaviors. I look at autism and ADHD research as being miles ahead because it's got a couple of decades on BFRBs in terms of people's awareness and understanding. And with all of these things, really what you're talking about is stigma. So some things are more stigmatized than others. And pulling something out of the darkness of being stigmatized takes time, and it takes lots of people's voices, lots of people standing on lots of stages talking about it. And for autism, autism is ahead of ADHD. So autism had a decade or two on ADHD. ADHD is very fashionable, very trendy. Remember, lots of people doing ADHD research, but it's nowhere near as advanced as autism research is. Things like anxiety and depression have got a couple of decades on autism research. So there's where the research is and how much we understand about the impact of things like depression and anxiety is a little bit ahead. But you're absolutely right that we are always fighting a kind of uphill battle to pull things out of the shadows and get them into public prominence. And all of these things intersect with each other. And so when you add on mental health and women's health and intersectionality with all sorts of other things, it is a constant battle to get the attention that these things need. And just like the question that we asked, that we answered earlier, the fact that these things do have an additive, multiplicative effect, and in the end, what you end up with is a body in distress, in some way is where we need to put our focus, I think.
Sorry, I just want to give a quick shout out to Kiri, who does who does really cool research on wounds, pain, and I think you're looking into neurodiversity as well. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I was gonna put it your way as well. I guess kind of one of the practical things is around funding as well. So a lot of funding is now becoming quite project led. So we need to be thinking about contacting policymakers and getting it on the agenda there, so that then our funders then decide that that is something they want to be funding and that is on the agenda, and then we can kind of start getting that research going as well. But obviously there's some wonderful research already getting done at the back of the room as well. But
yeah, hi, thank you for the talk. It was really great to hear all your perspectives. I have a question from more like a cell biologist perspective. So starting my PhD right here this year, looking into genetics of neurodevelopment. I'm simply interested in a gene that's variants of this gene is linked to wisdom and different sort of neurodevelopmental differences. What I'm seeing often in literature is the term neurodevelopmental disorders. And you clearly touched on how you think that maybe focusing on the tone disorder, like that might not be as beneficial. So what do you think is like the most respectable way as sort of, what's your opinion on using this term, and how should we sort of be referring to this in research?
Yeah, thank you. It's a really good question. And I feel that we're in this stage of transition with the use of these words. The disorder model, the deficit model that we have used for decades, I catch myself using those words all the time because they're really, really in our lexicon. But I don't think we need them. I think we can describe all the things we need to describe without using that deficity language. So, for example, what we mean when we say the word disorder is that something has met a diagnostic threshold. So with lots of things, pain, anxiety, depression, whatever, BFRBs, whatever it might be, these are things that everybody feels, everybody experiences. But if you're experiencing them beyond diagnostic threshold, then we call that a disorder or a disease or whatever it might be, and we treat it. And therefore, what we're looking for is a way to treat it. And I think that that's still okay, because if I think again about BFRBs, where they're common, we all have them, everybody does them. But some people have clinically significant distress, and so they reach the level of a disorder, and they deserve the attention that the word disorder gives people. But I just think that we don't need the word disorder to describe we don't need the word disorder to describe the behavior more generally. We certainly don't need the word disorder if what we're talking about is traits. We don't need the word disorder. We often default to using that disordered language, when actually there's a perfectly respectable, decent alternative word that we can use instead. And difference is the first place that I would go to, because neurodevelopmental differences sounds pretty similar, but it isn't offensive.
Thank you so much.
Hello, thank you for the talk. That was very interesting. I have a question about the methodology that we use in research involving neurodivergent people and, developing people. We always use sort of self-reported measures, and I don't know, maybe use a scale to ask them to rate certain aspects of their ambitions. And sometimes we ask them to describe it, and I feel like, especially with neurodivergent people, that might be a barrier. And in my project as well, I work on negative injuries of palm, and ask them to describe emotions and rate how intense they are. Do you feel like this is a barrier, and then how do we move forward? Sounds like with you. Alex,
I mean, yeah. Well, yeah, so I think that's what led me to the communication of pain project. So when we do pain reception experiments, you need to calibrate people to pain stimuli level so that we're not giving people like very intense shocks. And I just found that I just really couldn't calibrate Hispanic people and autistic people. For example, I had a participant who said, okay, I broke 2 of my bones. And for me, that was 8 out of 10. And you told me that I need to be calibrated to 8 out of 10. So is that the amount of pain that you're expecting me to experience? And I'm like, no, this is research pain, that's clinical pain, that's different. And I think we had to have a discussion about how that's different. And he was like, well, but like, how do I know the worst pain imaginable if I've never experienced it? I don't know what that is. So that's where the communication of pain came from. And I think that's why I'm trying to get like various measures of pain experience. So like pain scale, I think we do need to have it in some way for clinical purposes, because like Claire said, you don't have 8 minutes with a GP and you need to give some kind of indication of how much pain you're in. But then we could think of like, look at things from like your pupil dilation, like skin conductors, and see if they converge, because we assume that they converge, but we don't. I don't think we know that's the case. So that's the experiment that I would try to do. But yeah, it doesn't exactly answer your question. But yeah, I am facing the same problem.
Thank you. Yeah, this is probably, I don't know if you're experiencing this in your research for visual imagery, but we do a lot of asking people to rate things from 0 to 100. So we get them to bring to mind whatever they're worried about. And we ask them to go say, oh, how vivid is this from 0 to 100? And it's been really interesting with the neurodivergent participants, because a lot of the time they're feeling, well, I don't know, like it's there, and sometimes it is kind of this experience of kind of going, well, is that a scale that actually works in this group of people? So it's been really interesting doing feedback interviews at the end of these studies and asking people, well, what was your 50? Was your 50 like a 0 and then we're going negative and we're going positive, or was your 50 like halfway up, or like? So I think kind of it's been really interesting just taking the time to have a little chat with people afterwards and be like, well, how did you perceive that scale? Like, what was it that we did? So I think with all of this, it's just asking the question sometimes, and not just assuming people are interpreting things the way that you think they are, like your example as once.
Thank you.
I can't see it at almost time.
Sorry. Blind.
Last question. Last question.
Hi, thank you. Very interesting talk. I'd like to ask, we covered it a little bit, but I would like to go back to language and neurodiversity. And at this point, within neurodiversity, we don't just need autism, ADHD, we need OCD, we need Tourette's syndrome. Now, these are conditions that have very different needs, very different. I think there was an article that came out very recently about how different conditions like to identify. So autistic people like autistic people. People with Tourette's prefer language where they talk about the person before their condition. Do you think there is this danger that we muddle them up altogether when we used the term neurodiversity? And do you think, to a certain degree, it's still just autistic people that use that specific term?
Okay. That's a really good question. And it was an interesting paper. I mean, the general rule I go by is just respecting whatever other people want to use. So I think it would be really silly of me to go around correcting the way that people talk about their own experience of neurodiversity. But yeah, it depending on what we fit under that umbrella, kind of depends how we look at this. So I did a study where neurodivergent was, I think it was ADHD, autism, and dyslexia. And that was the remit of that. But as I said, sometimes that might include, sometimes people put depression and anxiety under the neurodiversity umbrella. When we talk about neurodiversity, that is as a whole set of people. So when we talk about people being neurodiverse, that includes people that don't have these experiences as well. So I think that's a jumbled way of saying that we should just respect what individuals are using. And I also just want to say, like, I've kind of hosted talks before where people from different countries that are not Western countries use different ways of describing neurodiversity or autism or ADHD. And, you know, had people in the comments being really upset by certain expressions. But then we take this really kind of Western view of how we've conceptualized it, and then we put that on other countries as well. So there's quite a lot of layers to how we unpick that. But yeah, I know that's not a very straightforward answer, but it's definitely something I think we're going to continue to think about.
I was going to say,
Yeah, the one that's always cited is, I think, Belgium is like the opposite. So they did the same study that in the UK, people prefer identity first language. They did the same study, I think, in the Netherlands and Belgium, and found the absolute opposite. And then we also have to take into account grammar and language and how that works as well. So it's all a mess. But I think as long as we're being respectful and, yeah, as I think Claire said, not always looking at the data set. It's about what it is to the individual person.
Okay. I think that is all the time we had left. Thank you so much, Claire, Eri, and Alice, for being here. And thanks to everyone who joined us. And have a rest of a good evening. I hope you enjoy it. We might be here for a few more minutes, so do you want to come and see us, please do. Otherwise, have a lovely evening, and we hope to see you at our part 2. Thank you.